So today we're going to be starting out with an introduction to paper cutout in Adobe Illustrator. This may seem a little bit overwhelming at first, but we're going to try and break it down into simple format so you can understand the basics of how to build out layers and show the process of showing depth within a paper cutout modification. To start out, I'm going to look to draw out a rectangle shape and go over to the rectangle tool, click and drag from the top corner of the page down to the bottom. I currently have a gradient, which I'm just going to pick out a flat color to begin with. Clicking on the eyedropper tool, I'm going to pick a sample from mid-tone of one of the preset colors I've created. We're going to start out with flat colors first, just so we can get the basic understanding of how it's going to be broken down. Over on the left side navigation, I'm going to go back over to the ellipse tool. And with the ellipse tool, I'm going to draw out an oval shape. With oval shape, I'm going to change this first to a lighter variation of the blue. I can always modify, rotate, change the shape a little bit so I can understand and see how the object is going to change based on the light, the shadow of an object. Once I have one oval, I'm going to look to create out a duplicate or create another variation on top of it. I can either go back over to the ellipse tool, draw out another, or I can make a copy of this one, Command or Control C, Command or Control F to paste the front. And to scale it down, I'm actually going to hold down Option and Shift so that I can scale it down, making it proportionally just smaller than the one that's currently above it. I'm going to use, again, the eyedropper tool to drop it down to lighter variation, different color. I can always move it around, change the placement. It's up to you to how you want to stack them. But I'm going to do this 2 more times. Command or Control C, Command and Control F. And again, scaling it down, I can hold down Option or Alt and Shift to scale down this object, making it smaller. And again, I'm just going to use the eyedropper tool to match to a lighter variation so we can see depth and see the difference between different layers. Finally, one more, Command or Control C, Command or Control F. And if I want to scale this down, I can hold down Alt or Option and Shift and grab a corner and just look to reduce the size. Finally, I'll just use the eyedropper to match out to the white so we can see depth from the top as we see the darker variations as it gets larger and larger stacked underneath. If we're looking at the most simplistic form of doing this process, we can look to select out our circle shapes. I'm going to click and drag from outside of my rectangle, selecting over the circles. I can hold down Shift to deselect the rectangle. And now with these circles selected, I can go over to my effects panel at the top navigation. Down in the Illustrator effects, I'm going to go to Stylize and Drop Shadow. With my default settings, we can see that my opacity is set up to 75%. The mode, I'm going to keep on multiply because it does give a little bit a better transition of the color for the drop shadow. But we can get always into adjusting the placement depending on where you really want to have the shadow placed. If I want to adjust the Y offset, reduce the arrow down, we get the shadow casting down and to the right of the objects. But we can always adjust the numbers ourselves as well. If I want to slightly adjust it, I can look to adjust the settings. And I'm going to do a little bit less on the blur, so I'll reduce it down to 0.05. So we can see how we can get a stronger shadow, or if it's too strong, we can always reduce the shadow, and I'll try 60%. I can always check or uncheck the preview, see how it looks to make sure I'm satisfied with it. Again, I'm going to adjust also my X offset, and we can see that we can get a closer variation. But we can really see now the stacking of the circles creates this layer effect. To get more complicated and to show variation in our size and our design, we can look to adding gradients. With gradients, I'm going to create some transitions from one color to the next. For our top white circle, I can select on the circle. I'm going to click on the gradient tool on the left side navigation and look to choose our gradient panel on the right side navigation. Currently, I already have a white to light blue gradient transferring, but I do want to have this transitioning very smoothly across, where I do get a little bit more light blue on the top left, but it does look almost white as I look at it. And we'll talk about how we can get into variations. But with our next gradient below, I'm going to select on the shape below. I can use the eyedropper to match this gradient. If I want to darken up the gradient, I can use the gradient tool to click and drag, adjusting the placement. But I am going to change this from, rather than white to light blue, I'll go light blue to the next dark variation. So I can use the eyedropper tool in the gradient panel and match to the next darkest sample. With a gradient, I can look to now draw it out. I'm going to uncheck the eyedropper tool off the gradient panel, and now I can get into transitioning this gradient, so it's a darker variation. I'll look to select out my next circle. Again, we can use the eyedropper tool to match to a gradient of our choice. And again, I'm going to look to use the samples provided for me, where I go with the next dark blue, and then use the eyedropper in the gradient panel to select a darker variation. I'll uncheck the eyedropper and look to redraw the gradient so we're getting a darker variation. And yes, this is a subtle growth of color, getting darker and darker as it goes layer by layer, but we can start to see a smooth transition, so it's not just a flat shape. I can use the eyedropper tool, match the gradient. I'll go darker with this color. Select the color that I want to adjust in my gradient, and I can use the eyedropper to match to the gradient that I want. Again, clicking off the eyedropper, I can redraw the gradient how I want. Get a little bit more color. So it's a lot more subtle in how these elements are put together. When it comes into making these a little bit more unique, we can always look to rearrange them, stack them in our own way. But we're really just trying to see how we can create depth of these simple shapes. Once I have these shapes created, if we want to keep it basic, yes, we can keep it into just simple gradients. But we really want to understand how far we can take this idea. If I want to get into adding in details, I want to see how I can add in some highlights on the top left side. Based on the shadow is off to the bottom right. So I want to have highlights that are going to appear on the top left. What I'm going to first look to do is turn off my drop shadows. What I'm going to do is select out all the circles, hold down Shift, deselect the rectangle, and over in the right side navigation, I'm going to click on my appearance panel. The appearance panel is essential in modifying any settings that you need to adjust. Right now, we're going to look to turn off our drop shadows, clicking the eyedropper tool or the eye visibility, so that we can look to add in some features and design elements. What I'm going to look to do is double click on the top circle. We can see when we double click, we go into what is called isolation mode. This allows me to focus on this shape without affecting the others. What I'm going to do is make a copy of this, Command or Control C, Command V. We have our one circle. What we're going to do is now do another copy, Command V again. So we have two circles, one sitting on top of the other. I'm going to adjust this down to the right, and we can see that based off the highlight, we're actually leaving a little bit of top element that we're going to look to use as our highlight area. What we're going to look to do is select out both pieces, and you have the option of either using the shape builder or the pathfinder, whatever your preference is. But what we're going to do is eliminate out the middle and the bottom side and leave this top piece on the top left. If I want to use the pathfinder tool, Currently I have the Pathfinder on the right side navigation. I want to keep the top left piece. So what I would do is go over to my minus front, and it would cut out everything that's on top of that top left piece. And then I could use this piece and bring it over to my other design. Or if I wanted to, I can click on the shape builder. With the shape builder, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and click and drag through the pieces I don't want. It gives me the same effect, but it's a matter of preference, what you prefer to do with your design. So again, I have the Pathfinder where I can do minus front, second option in the shape modes of the Pathfinder. That cuts that area out. Or the shape builder, I can hold down Alt or Option and click and drag through those pieces. But the reason why we did this is for this highlighted section. We're going to take this section, I'm going to make a copy of this, Command C. I can hit backspace, and now what we're going to do is paste in that highlight and place this on the top left side of this first circle. Right now it's a little bit close in the coloring, so what I'm actually going to do is knock it out to a lighter variation. I can either use the gradient tool, so we get more of a white highlight, and we see how we add in this highlighted element top of the shape. It just helps to make this stand out a little bit stronger, separating it from my other shapes. Because we used the same shape and maintained the same size and proportion for these shapes, I could use this same shape for the other pieces as well. But when you have other pieces that are different shapes, you are going to have to do customized shapes and cutouts for highlights. But just to give an example, if I do want to use this again, I can hit Command C, Command V, slide this up to the outside piece, and scale up this piece so it fits better to our next sized circle. May take some time to get used to in scaling it up, but we don't want to have it pure white, so I am going to adjust the gradient so it's a little bit more subtle. But when I click off of it, it's still a highlight. It still shows that element of creating dimension and depth on the shape. If I do want to adjust the gradient even more, I could always adjust the placement of how the gradient is traveling. So it's just a little bit more subtle. But it's just a matter of finding that happy medium to make it a highlight without taking away or distracting from the shape. So again, if I do want to create another highlight and I have a different shape that I have to affect, I'm going to choose the shape I want to affect. I'm going to double click on it to go into isolation mode. I'm going to hit Command C, Command V. And again, I'm going to do Command C, Command V, so I can look to place it on top of the other. I'm going to select out both pieces, and I can either use the shape builder over on the left side or use the Pathfinder and click minus front, and it leaves me with this top left piece. I can make a copy, Command C, backspace. I'm going to get out of isolation mode, double clicking off of the objects. I can paste this in and look to place this on top left side of my circle that I have the exact size that I need. Now it's just a matter of modifying my gradient. So if I want my gradient lighter, I can click off, see how it looks. If I want it more subtle, I could always pick the above circle to get a lighter color. I'm just looking to create out what is a highlight for this specific circle. Finally, we have one more. Double click on the circle, Command C, Command V. And then do Command C, Command F. And I can slide this circle a little bit down to the right, select on both pieces, and use this shape, the minus front on the Pathfinder to cut that area out. Make a copy, Command C, backspace, and then I will do a Command V and paste it in so I can place it on the top left side of that shape. Again, I'm just going to match the gradient to the circle above so that we see that we do get a highlight. And now it really adds in a lot more depth to the shape. But we do originally have those drop shadows that we applied onto those 4 circles earlier. If I want to reapply those, I'm going to select them out. I can click on them one at a time, holding Shift. And I can go over to my appearance panel and click on the eye visibility to bring back those drop shadows. And we see how much more lively it is when we have gradients and these highlights to really accentuate those shapes. Now we have this right side to really understand how we can now create depth and do cutouts within sections. If I want to create out depth over on these pieces to the right side, what I'm going to look to do, where we can get into a little bit more customization, I'm going to go over to the pencil tool. Pencil tool, left side navigation. If double rows, 6th icon down. I'm going to use the pencil tool to click and drag to draw out a more free-form shape. It's a little bit difficult to see with the stroke that I currently have, so let me adjust. I'll go over to my layers. I'm just going to adjust my stroke color. Rather than light blue, we'll do light red so it's easier to see. But now when I click with the pen tool, or pencil tool, we can see these red lines to help us draw out the shape. I just want to get back to where I started. This initial shape that we have can be used again to draw out more aspects on the inside of the shape. But just to show some variation, I can use the eyedropper tool and just match it to the next darker color. We're going to look to draw in shapes inside of this. And go back over to my pencil tool. I'm going to click and drag to create out a shape that relatively fits inside of the space that I've already created. They can be a little bit more free form. They don't have to follow the same exact shape. It can be more customized. But ultimately, we're trying to get to that same relative space and go with a darker variation. So you can see that I can move these around, adjust the placement, but we're looking to create depth within the shapes. So if I want to go more simple, I can again draw out with the pencil tool. And use the eyedropper to match the next darker variation. This final shape, I'll go a little bit darker just so we can see it. But I have all these different shapes, and we can see that they are now detached or still separate pieces. But what I'm going to look to do is actually select on the entire rectangle as well as the pieces I've just created. And I can use the shape builder or the Pathfinder, whichever your preference is. What we can do is use in the Pathfinder, we can use the divide, second tool, or the first icon on the second section. And what this does is create out separations of each layer. What I want to do first, though, is ungroup this. So I would have to go up to Object, Ungroup, so that I can select on those individual pieces. I still have the circles over behind on the left side. All I have to do is select on the pieces that I want to move, and Command Shift left bracket. I get those circles back over on that right side. But if we want to see that depth, what I'm going to look to do is select out those pieces on the right side. I'm going to deselect the outside rectangle. And if I add the drop shadow, just like we did previously, I'm going to go up to Effect, Stylize, and Drop Shadow. We see that we have the drop shadows applied just like we do for the circles on the left, but we're trying to create the sense that this is going deeper, going into the shape. So I'm going to click OK for right now. If I want to reorganize layers, I can click on the layers itself and reorganize the compound paths that we made. Or you may get in the routine of simply hitting Command or Control Shift left bracket, moving that object backwards. I'm going to again hit Command left bracket, adjusting this backwards. I'm going to go from inside out. Each time I go from inside out, I have to select on the previous layer and now the new layer, Command left bracket, sending that object backwards. I'm going to hold down Shift, click on now the outside piece, Command left bracket. This drops it down. Right now we don't have a gradient on this rectangle, but I can go back up to my settings, effects, stylize, drop shadow, and now we see how the drop shadow is applied inside of that shape. And again, we can always do gradients if we want to create more depth, but the idea is seeing the depth and seeing that we can create the sense of space. So we're not just leaving out flat shapes, but we're seeing how depth can be created using this arrangement of colors, these tints and shades of this blue-green color. We can always go back into the process of using gradients. If I wanted to create transitions of color, I can always click on the gradient tool, apply a gradient from the right side onto an object. If I want to select on a certain shape, I can take this color, look to apply it in a gradient format, clicking, dragging this color onto my gradient bar. And I click and drag the gradient to make different variations or colors on this color. I'll look to select at the next level. I'll take the darker bluish green color, eliminate out the light color, and then click and drag to use a gradient to have a transition from a darker variation. So if you're not getting enough depth, you could always look to bring in a darker color. Just select the next layer down. I'll take this darker variation, take out the light variation. And we're just adjusting the gradient to apply and make these darker pieces appear as if they're getting deeper and deeper into the shape. Finally, we're just going to take the darkest variation. I can click and drag it onto the gradient. And we can see how we've just added depth to these shapes. So when it does come into the highlights for these pieces, if I have the drop shadow appearing on the left edge because it's going inward, we actually want to have the highlight on the bottom outside right. So what I'm going to look to do first is just to eliminate out the drop shadows for a moment. I'm going to uncheck the drop shadow or click the eye visibility to hide out those drop shadows. For this piece, what I'm going to look to do, again, double click on it to go into isolation mode. With this piece selected, I'm going to hit Command C, Command V. But we have to make sure that we get the outside or the section that's inside of the shape as well. We can't just select on the outside piece, it's only selecting around the outside frame. What we're going to do is select over both the pieces. I can click and drag from the outside corner so it selects the pencil tool that we drew inside of the shape. So what we're going to do is look to select out the area of the isolated section. I'm going to make a copy, Command C, and then do Command F, pasting it to front. I'm going to change the color of this so we can see a separation, something different than the color of the original design. With this piece, we're going to make another copy. Command F, and change this color, say, to white. The reason being is that we're going to slightly adjust this white variation down to the right. And we're going to select both the yellow piece and the white piece. And with the Pathfinder, we're going to click on minus front, leaving us just these yellow pieces on the bottom right side of the shape. It also does leave us this piece on the top left side, but we're going to look to eliminate this momentarily. So what I want to do is make a copy of this yellow. I can hit Command C, backspace, and get out of isolation mode. Then I'm going to do Command F, pasting that yellow back in. Again, we do not want to see this top yellow, so what I can do is double click on the piece and backspace, and we can see that we leave this yellow highlight that's going to be sitting on the bottom right edge of all the accents of the shape. From here, we're going to look to apply a lighter variation, and I can use the eyedropper to match to a gradient from maybe my left side so that we can see a lighter transition of color. I'm going to click and drag to create a transition. And we see that we've just added a highlight on the bottom right side, so it is a little bit different. If I do want to make it lighter, I can always use the eyedropper, pick out a lighter variation or a lighter gradient, just so it transitions through all these pieces. So once I have those highlights, I'm going to click on the next piece, double click on it to go into isolation mode. And I want to select over the entire piece. Again, Command C, then Command F. With this copy, I'm going to do first a yellow copy, then again, Command F. I'm going to make this copy now white, and then adjust this slightly down to the right. With this copy slightly down to the right, I'm going to select both the yellow and the white, and again do the minus front from the shape modes. Understand that we are going to keep the pieces that appear on the bottom right, but eliminate out the pieces on the top left. So if I wanted to go into isolation mode, I could, but it's a little bit easier if we first make a copy, Command C, get out of isolation mode, and then Command F to paste in our features. Again, if I don't want to keep certain aspects, double click, go into isolation mode, backspace out the pieces on the top left sides. So with these yellow pieces remaining, again, I want to create a highlight. I can use the eyedropper tool to match to, again, another gradient. Or picking out the gradient from above, we can modify the gradient so it travels and creates a highlight on those features. We have a couple more elements, and then we'll select out the inside piece, Command C. Double click on it to go into isolation mode. I'm going to select over both. Command C, Command F, change it to yellow. Then Command F again and change it to white and adjust it down to the right. I'm going to look to select both the yellow and the white. Use the minus front. And then I can eliminate out the top left pieces, leaving us the bottom right pieces. So selecting over just the yellow pieces, Command C, backspace, get out of isolation mode, double clicking outside of one of the objects, Command F, and use a gradient to match to the next lighter variation, creating that highlight on those sections. So when I click off of it, we can see that we're just adding these little elements that help create depth, so it's not just a flat piece overall. Finally, again, the inside piece, I'm going to double click, click and drag over both the pieces from the inside out. Command C, Command F, turn it to yellow, Command F again, change it to white. Use the arrow keys to nudge it down to the right. I'm going to select both the yellow pieces and the white. Click on the minus front. I'm going to eliminate out the left side highlights. And with these remaining pieces, again, Command C, backspace, get out of isolation mode, and Command F, pasting them in, giving myself the highlights necessary for the shape. I can modify the gradient with the gradient tool in the left side navigation. Now that we have these gradients created, I'm going to select back on these original pieces and click on the outside piece, hold Shift, clicking inside of the shapes. And then I can go back over to my appearance panel and reapply the drop shadows. With them reapplied, we can now really see the depth and the difference of having a highlight on the right, a drop shadow on the left side. So if I zoom out, we can see a lot more depth. We can see the difference between when we stack objects versus when we cut into areas, leaving the depth within the cutout. The final element that you can consider doing is adding in a texture. A texture just helps to give it more of a paper-like look and feel. I've already produced an image that can match and replicate the same idea. I can scale it to fit it over to the area that I want, but I have to make sure to move it to the top of my page. So Command Shift right bracket. And to create a blend, we're going to go over to our transparency panel, where it says normal in the transparency panel. We're going to look to adjust and see what happens when we do first multiply. Right now the texture is a little bit too strong overall, so I'm going to try color burn. And that's a lot more natural, giving me that paper-like feel while still maintaining the color that I want for the design. But it also is still a little bit strong overall, so I'm going to actually drop the opacity, so it's a little bit more subtle. So if I drop this down to about 50%, it doesn't take away too much, but it does give it a texture, so it's a lot more interesting. So one last look, we can see how we have highlights on the aspects of the circles or the oval shapes. We have the drop shadows casting down to the right. Then over on the inside cutout of the shapes, we have the drop shadows appearing on the top left, and then the highlights on the right sides. So I hope you enjoyed, and hope you can take away an understanding better of how to create paper cutout in Adobe Illustrator.